This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Grab a cup of tea and sit down by the fire. We are starting a new series on cozy horror.
All right. So, as Lisa said in our intro, and as she hinted in our last episode, this is our first major topic of season 10. We are diving into cozy horror to explore the genre and talk about what it is, and then also talk about some of the books and movies and other such things that fit in there. So, as we typically do with the first episode of a new topic, we'll spend this one mostly kind of discussing the genre as a whole and just kind of having a conversation about it before we get into some specific examples in the next couple of episodes. And so, I guess the best place to start is kind of defining what even is cozy horror, because I know there is probably a lot of you who are thinking, well, what even is that? What is cozy horror? And it's probably something that we'll have to define together through this episode, through conversation. But in my mind, it's something that, at the very least, has elements of a cozy tale, something that is slower, maybe more rustic, almost calmer even, but still has elements of horror. And in our preparation for this show, Lisa provided a really good link to an article that kind of has a little bit of discussion of cozy horror and kind of what it could be. And so I definitely want to just kind of step aside and mention that I'm going to link this article in the show notes for anyone who's interested, because I think it's a great starting place. But for me, I mean, I think it's the opposite of a slasher or an Eli Roth movie or something that's meant to keep you amped up and pumped up full of adrenaline constantly. It's not chock full of jump scares, but you can still have horror that's not embodying any of those things. And I know we'll talk about it probably more in depth, but the graphic novel Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees is a fantastic example of it. I would even say something like, and this is referenced in the article that Lisa shared with us, the movie Spirited Away could very much count as cozy horror. It's, or at least has cozy horror elements. The overall story may not be a horror story per se, but there is something horrific about a child watching her parents get turned into pigs and have to explore a magical, fantastical realm all on her own, trying to save them and turn them back. I mean, there's a lot of elements of horror that seep into that movie. There's some, especially I want to call him Ghostface, but that's not right. Nothing Face, the who shows up and is just terrifying when he first shows up in the movie. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you should definitely go check it out. It's one of my favorite films. Like, I just absolutely adore it. So I guess I do want to turn it over to Mel and Lisa to jump in a second and kind of offer their takes on the definition. But I guess for me, part of the definition of cozy horror is it may not have the traditional elements that we might associate with horror, like the jump scare, the blood and gore everywhere, the high adrenaline, constantly on the edge of your seat. But horror doesn't have to do that. You know, you could have a horror story or use horror elements in a story without it being a slash fest or a gore fest. Um, I would say, well, this probably isn't a great fit, but um, long stretches of the Mike Flanagan show Midnight Mass, for example, like it's a character driven drama at its core that also happens to be about uh, vampires and horror and that sort of thing. But I don't think that's the best example of cozy horror, but it's kind of one thing that my mind like looked to because it's not about constantly scaring you. It will occasionally have some very fearful moments, but the early episodes are very much more like it's a slow burn kind of thing. And when I hear cozy horror, the slow burn is really what stands out to me the most. So, Mel, Lisa, why don't you all weigh in and let's see if we can't define this a little better.
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in there and talk about cozy horror a little bit. You know, this is, I think, going to be one of the trickier definitions we've tried to nail down because I think a lot of it is going to depend on what each individual person considers cozy. I will say I like what you were pointing out, Matt, that maybe it's easier to begin to define it by putting it in juxtaposition to what it isn't. So it's not going to be something that I think you mentioned, like the Eli Roth kind of um like hostile type movies, right? You know, where it's really the violence and the gore is really in your face, and uh it's 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 not something that you're probably going to watch to evoke a feeling of cozy. um I When you were talking, I kept thinking of that essay by Anne Radcliffe in like the 1790s, during her heyday, when she was talking about the difference between terror and horror, which we still have a different definition of it today, but it's changed quite a bit and morphed quite a bit over the centuries. But basically her argument was that terror was meant to just kind of titillate the senses, um akin to, I guess, sitting down, like, you know, maybe by a fire and listening to a spooky ghost story and feeling um the hair on your arm stand up, or getting goosebumps, or, you know, that sort of thing, kind of looking over your shoulder, which is almost a fun feeling for some of us. You know, it's kind of that carnival, fun house feeling of it, I think. But then she put that against horror, which was meant to, she, in her words, it was meant, rather than just titillate the senses and awaken them, it actually like obliterated them. So it was something that almost, it went so far as to become a numbing thing. um Again, we use it very differently, and we're looking at horror as kind of the over genre of all of this, the umbrella genre. um but cozy horror, I do think it needs to evoke certain feelings. I'm gonna put it out there and say that it needs to be set in the fall or winter. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but that feels cozy to me. um I think it needs to be something that invites multiple watches. So it's not going to be any of these, like, I've definitely had horror movies where I was like, "Oh, you know, I'm glad I watched that. I'm never going to watch it again, but I'm glad I watched it the first time." I think cozy horror is going to be one of those things that, you know, because it does invoke that feeling of coziness. You know, like you just want to put a warm blanket around yourself and watch it again and again. So I think that's going to be it. I also think it's important to point out too that it does not mean that it is not scary, because I think a lot of people use the term cozy horror as almost a derogative term. when you're in certain horror circles, kind of like, that's not real horror. Um, and I know some authors who have been labeled that have kind of bristled against it because, again, they don't want it to be used as a derogatory term. So I do want to point out that I don't think cozy horror does not mean it's not going to terrify you. It's not going to scare you. I think it just maybe lures you in with a sense of false safety, which I think can kind of open it up a little bit to what cozy horror can be. Um, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I do feel like there's some element of fun to it. Um, but yeah, that's as we're kind of nailing it down, that's some of the things I want to add. I'm really curious to hear what Mel has to say about the subject though, because I know Mel likes cozy mysteries. And I don't know how much of that genre crosses in to cozy horror.
I do like to decompress with cozy mysteries at some point, and I think it's because for some of the reasons that I think people like cozy horror. Though I just want to say, having listened to you guys, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Though I do think cozy anything can be kind of subjective because, like, what's one person's comfort read or watch might not be for another. But I do think it's important, Lisa, that you said it's still scary in some way. I like the idea of the slow burn and the kind of like fall or winter vibes, like the comfort idea of it. And Matt, I agree that Spirited Away kind of works. I mean, I hate to like subgenre, but maybe it's like cozy horror adjacent or something. But I actually thought of Spirited Away because that's a movie that I can watch it any time of the year, but I think especially fall and winter, it kind of works. And there's some scary stuff in there. Um, but yeah, I feel kind of sad when people get like irritated with the term cozy horror. I feel like cozy horror I mean, I'm no expert on this, but I feel like we probably talked about cozy mysteries before cozy horror. I think cozy horror almost kind of like followed on to that, if that makes sense, as like a term to like attract readers, right? If you like these sorts of things or these tropes, you'll be interested in this. And I think it also might get people who like cozy mysteries to be interested as well. But I think cozy horror has been around, like you said, Lisa, since the very beginning. I also thought about the definitions of terror and horror. We have all these subgenres that are great for bringing more readers into horror. And a lot of times the subgenres are just things that have been there all the time. We're just naming them to help readers find these things. And I feel like cozy horror is that kind of thing because I would say that, the ghost story, which developed out of the Gothic, and, the idea of M.R. James writing stories just so he could get all his friends and colleagues together at his university around a fire and they would kind of scare each other. It's like, there's almost like a communal aspect to it. It's scary, but the idea is it's Christmas and we're around a fire and we're cozy and we're going to tell stories. The idea of scary stories and you're drinking hot cocoa with marshmallows or whatever, it's maybe going to scare you. But there's that, again, that kind of seasonal vibe thing going on. And then I think, if you think about like Gothic romances of the 50s and 60s, those were comforting, kind of low stakes, a little bit of scares, but predictable tropes, and you knew that the woman in those situations was going to be okay. And I think cozy horror can be really scary, but humor can diffuse a lot and make it a little bit more comfortable. And so that's another aspect I kind of see in cozy horror. So yeah, I think those are my kind of additions, is that I think this is something that's been around a long time. We just keep throwing terms on things, trying to like attract readers, which makes sense. Um, but I also think it's important to realize that there are some connections to horror. It's just maybe a different way of doing it. A couple of things that I thought of when I was trying to think of like examples of this. A lot of people talk about how Darcy Coates's books, especially the ones about houses, are kind of cozy. I think they fulfill a lot of what you were talking about, Lisa. I've read one of them at this point, but I want to read more. And then, of course, Bradbury's Something Wicked, This Way Comes, in October Country. It's like all over social media. We've talked about it multiple times on this podcast. These are books that we like to return to when it's fall. And there's some scary stuff in there, but there's also the nostalgia, and there's a comfort, there's the vibes, and it's not low stakes, but I do think there's some slow burn there. And with Something Wicked, we know there's going to be consequences, but they're going to be okay. And so I think it's personally what invites you to reread and rewatch, but I think it's also just all of these characteristics that we've been putting out there. It is a feeling. I think it is kind of emotion more than anything. But I think there are connectors between a lot of what people think of as cozy horror. And I think it's cool that this is something that people are talking about, because I'm sure this is a subgenre that folks have liked for a while, and now they've got a way to be like, oh, this is kind of compartmentalizes it so I can find more stuff.
You know, when I just listening to you talk, because I was like, oh man, I feel like this whole conversation is going to be us saying, it's just the feeling that you get, the emotions that you have, the vibe of it. But it is. I mean, when you talk about it, but I wonder if we think about it and try to like put language to that, which I think is going to be difficult. I think the atmosphere does have to be inviting and comforting. We've been using those terms a lot. Um, I do think the tone of it is a little bit softer. Um, and we haven't talked much about the characters, but I think in a lot of these, the characters are either very relatable or people that we want to be friends with. Even sometimes the monsters in there, I think I don't know. I would think that that is something that sets these things apart too. I can't really see if you're gonna do cozy horror having like an unlikable or even an unreliable narrator. The narrator may do bad things. um, especially when you kind of get into, because I've seen a lot of people recommend like witch stories um in this category. But yeah, I do think that that is maybe one of the things too that sets this apart, is like the fact that even if the characters do unsavory things, we still want to follow their story, that we still feel some sort of connection to them too. I think that that's an important part of it. Also, probably just in general, a focus on relationships more than maybe the typical horror would. I think we've mentioned slashers as being an opposite to cozy horror, in part because of the focus on violence and gore and those types of stories, which you guys know I love a slasher. But I do think that the relationships in cozy horror feel more intimate and feel more personal and feel deeper than in some slashers, where it ends up being you just want to see how the killer is going to knock down these victims. And where the only character we really have a connection to is probably the final girl. I think that might be something that adds to this cozy horror atmosphere.
I completely agree with you there. I think you are definitely right that the relationships and the relatability of the narrator are a pretty big factor in cozy horror. I I really I really can't imagine something being cozy horror where I viscerally disliked the narrator. But as you said, the narrator may do things that we disagree with. They may make choices that we don't like. That just because we relate to them and empathize with them doesn't necessarily mean that we're always on their side for everything that they do. But I absolutely think that that's a a very vital part of what would be cozy, because I mean, part of cozy is feeling comfortable, and it's very hard to feel comfortable if you're reading a story or watching a movie or TV show about someone that you have just complete and utter dislike or distaste for. you know this isn't related to cozy horror, but that was my big problem with the show Weeds. I watched the first 2 seasons and then was like, I can't watch any more of it. I'm just tired of watching this character that I don't really like make bad decisions constantly. um, so I mean, I can't. Cozy implies a bit of relaxation, and it's definitely hard to relax and slightly let your guard down if you're not able to relate to the characters that are involved, especially the main character. And I actually wanted to add something, because I was looking back through that Mary Sue article that you had shared that I referenced earlier. And one of the things that they define as an element for cozy horror is that it has actual stakes to it. If you have something that has some spooky elements, but you never feel like the happy ending is really compromised, like you always know that it's going to end happily ever after and there is no real concern, that is not something that I think would be cozy horror, because to have horror there has to be those stakes. I mean, we have to have actual fear that's something is going to happen. So that's another element that I feel is pretty, I mean, I wouldn't say vital, but I'd say it's a component for cozy horror, that that there should be some actual stakes. Is this cozy character that we really like, are they going to go to jail or whatever? I don't know. I'm just kind of being generic here, but we need to have those actual stakes, um, rather than just knowing, oh well, this is a fairy tale that has some scary moments, but everything's going to work out all right. Definitely not cozy horror in my book.
Yeah, I agree on both counts. I mean, even if you're reading a cozy book of any type that has lower stakes, you still need stakes. And I think even cozy horror can have big stakes because, I mean, even if you think, well, this book seems to me like there's gonna be a happy ending, you still have to like question that or be worried about it in some way, or you're not gonna hang on. You're gonna lose that suspense or that tension that makes the story work. And I agree that we have to like the people. I mean, I think a lot of cozy horror has relationships in it, friendships, romantic relationships, otherwise, people in a small town, lived here all my life, protecting it. You have to have those connections for people to care. When my cozy horror character goes to the local coffee shop, I want there to be a quirky cast of characters in there. I don't want it to be like they're just a face of the crowd, which actually got me thinking, and I don't, this might be something for you to respond to, Lisa, because I know we've talked about recently how we always come back to Shirley Jackson no matter what. But when I was looking up examples online of cozy horror just to get a feel for what people think it is or what people identify as cozy horror, I saw We Have Always Lived in the Castle pop up several times. And somebody said that Shirley Jackson was a cozy read for them. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know about that because one of the major things about Shirley Jackson's work is I think there's empathy, but it's anxiety. I mean, that's the thing that she said was underlying all of her work. And you're supposed to be anxious from the first page to the last page. Um, I mean, I think I can see like if you love We Have Always Lived in the Castle and you love to reread it over and over again, well, you've got predictability, you've got the love of that particular character, and I like Mary Cat. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's cozy horror, just because the whole purpose of Shirley Jackson's books was to be like talk about isolation and raise anxiety. It's cozy to some people, I think, when Mary Cat tries to go shopping in town and everybody's mean and wants to stone her. But I'm not sure that that necessarily goes by the definition that most people would say was cozy horror. But I know you love Shirley Jackson, Lisa. So what are your thoughts? I know you think it's cozy, but
I was gonna say counterpoint. Um,
tell me where I'm wrong.
I mean, Yes, I think Shirley Jackson does focus a lot on the anxiety. And that is kind of the opposite of this like relaxing, cozy atmosphere. But we are talking cozy horror, and I don't think you can get away from the anxiety of it. Um, because there are some, I think, controversial things that I would consider cozy horror. And I will explain why, because I do think the horror part is important. I think Shirley Jackson, in large part, is. I mean, her stories share a lot with, because when we talk about like the history of cozy horror, I feel like cozy horror has always been a part of the horror genre. Um, the Christmas ghost story we've mentioned, like Washington Irving, these kind of like the legend of Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman, and you know, I mean, you can't get more, I think, cozy and autumnal than that, or these gothic stories, like I mentioned, Anne Radcliffe. I think those would definitely fit into that. I think that's a genre that most people kind of feel a little bit relaxed in. But Shirley Jackson, I mean, I think about like Mary Cat, for instance, and she's a character that I think I more than empathize with. And it's not that like, I don't know, I just love Mary Cat so much. So I feel like it fits. Even though, she's quite literally a murderer. And now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, my initial point was, I'm like, but there's so much tea drinking in Shirley Jackson, like it has to be cozy. But then I thought, yeah, but chances are the tea is poisoned in most of the stories.
And there's kitchens, and they're being very
I
domestic.
mean, it
Yeah.
is a very, it's
There's jams.
domestic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's jams, there's, and her magic, especially when we're talking about Mary Cat, like, her magic is also, I think, a very cozy form of magic. The idea of like just putting the little protections all around the land, and it feels very homegrown. And so maybe there is a lot of crossover with like domestic horror. But even then, I think there's two separate things too, because when I think about a domestic horror that is not cozy, like decidedly not cozy, I think about like the movie Funny Games, which I saw the original and I saw the English version. Both of them terrified me and disturbed me. Possibly the English version more. You know, that is anxiety from the beginning that just never lets up. Whereas something like Shirley Jackson, I think she does ease you into it. And I'm thinking about like, um I'm thinking about her short story, The Lottery. I mean, I think that's one of the, even though it kind of goes against my rule of it being like autumn or winter, because that is a summer story. But it does kind of lure you into this very cozy atmosphere. And then slowly, it's like putting you in the warm water and slowly boiling you without you realizing. So that to me is a different type of like anxiety and horror. I think it sneaks up on you. I also, this is where I said it might get controversial. I thought about the movie Midsommar, which I saw in some list, and I don't think I would go so far as to call it cozy horror. I think it has some cozy horror elements because it does kind of trick you into thinking. I think this is where cozy horror and like folk horror may share a lot of overlap. And the reason I say it's not cozy horror is because I think the family's death in the beginning of that film does the same thing as like a Funny Games or something. Like it sets the anxiety meter so high that even when it lets off that a little bit, you're still not fully relaxed. But I think with something like Shirley Jackson, you are. Like it kind of eases you in. So I don't know. That's kind of maybe my definition, because I think it is. I mean, but I was also, when I was thinking about other things that might be considered it, I mean, I know we mentioned like I've seen some things like Rachel Harrison's Cackle, T. Kingfisher, um, and one of my sons recommended when I was talking about this, Coraline, which is a movie that he loves. And I think that fits into it because even the horror elements of that are meant to kind of lure you in and make you feel safe and comfortable, but again, the stakes are very real, and before you realize it, it turns absolutely terrifying. um so yes, to answer your question, I do think Shirley Jackson fits into cozy horror. um yeah.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, and I thought of Coraline as well. And, I also thought, like, the classic Twilight Zone, because people love rewatching that over and over again and watching it when they take down their Christmas tree. It's definitely gotten kind of a fall, winter following, I think.
Well, maybe since we're already kind of talking about it, maybe we should offer up some recommendations for some of the things that we would consider cozy horror, or maybe even if it's something off the wall that the rest of us will not agree with necessarily, but things that we want to watch when we're wanting, to kind of snuggle in, put on a horror movie, but still feel warm and fuzzy and relaxed, even as people are screaming for their lives.
I was just gonna jump in and say, I don't know, you might share this with me, Lisa, but I have to admit, like, classic Vincent Price horror movies kind of are a cozy thing for me. I like to watch them every fall if I can. And I also like to watch the original Ghostbusters movie. So I'm not sure if they would be considered cozy or not. I think maybe so, because they use humor and they have low stakes in there about relationships. But those are just cozy things for me that I like to revisit every kind of spooky season.
In that same vein, what I was going to jump in and say is I think a lot of the classic like Universal monster movies for me qualify as cozy horror, especially Bela Lugosi as Dracula. I mean, that's bring it on. I can watch it anytime. I've seen it 1,000 times, know it by heart practically, love it. It for me evokes cozy, but I also, you know, fully admit that that's partly because the film is so old and has been around in the cultural zeitgeist so long. I do recognize that it was true horror when it was released, and people did find it scary at the time. But for me, at least, that's something that evokes that nice um, coziness. And maybe it's because I, as a kid, just absolutely adored that movie, The Monster Squad, where it has all of the Universal monsters in it. So maybe there's a little bit of nostalgia seeping in that way as well.
The Monster Squad. I love it. No, well, I think both of y'all bring up something really interesting that I'm surprised we didn't talk about in our, I guess, definition part of it, and that's the nostalgia aspect to cozy horror, because I do think that nostalgia probably does play a big role in what we would consider cozy and the things that we're going to turn to, especially in this time of year. Um, when we're recording this, it's the middle of October, the weather's starting to turn, everybody's decorating for Halloween. And so there, you reach for the things that will set the mood for you. And I think that will evoke a cozy feel. One of the ones I put on, in addition to, Universal Monsters, Vincent Price, yes. House of Wax in particular evokes that for me, but also The House on Haunted Hill. I think we've talked about that one in the past, but I love that one. But I think for me, like for instance, is Scream, the original, will always be kind of my cozy horror watch. That's something that I've watched so many times. I love the characters. It does have that, I mean, granted, it's a very, like, 90s, tone to it, but it does have that, kind of back to school, um, fall vibe to it, which I like, kind of like the Halloween movies, always kind of have that, and kids getting ready to go trick or treating and things like that. But, with Scream, I think it does have that kind of nostalgic factor to me. So, and as Mel pointed out, like it does use humor to diffuse uh, some of the some of the horror in there. So in that case, I might let that one slide in as a recommendation.
I'll actually you're talking about Scream made me think of another one that didn't originally think of, but I'm gonna put it out there. For me, Shaun of the Dead. Um, it's I've seen that movie upwards of 30 times at the minimum. But yeah, that one always makes me smile, and there are like the layers of the writing and the jokes. Hell, there were some jokes, and some of this might be a cultural thing, but there were some jokes that I didn't get until like the fifth or sixth time that I watched the movie. And I fully admit some of that might be because I'm just not fully steeped in British culture, and it was like oh, I get that now. But um, it's got that element of humor, and I mean, it is a straight up satire in a lot of ways. But going back to that comment I made about stakes, like it does have stakes. Characters do die in that movie, quite a lot of them actually, and so um, yeah, I would put forward Shaun of the Dead as an example as well. At least for me personally.
I wonder, I was just thinking if we're doing like humor and nostalgia together, it's a very recent movie, but Lisa Frankenstein, I think that has the potential for coziness. And, as we get further and further away from it, it's definitely nostalgia.
That's a great example. I love that you mentioned that, Mel.
And there are definitely stakes in it.
Yes, there are. No, I like where we're going with this, and yeah, I would even something like Shaun of the Dead that you mentioned, Matt. If you can't, like, part of me, I like when we were gonna start this, I was gonna say, okay, when you look at creatures that can be in cozy horror, it feels natural to lean towards the witch. Um, Maybe it's the domestic aspect of it, thinking of an older woman in a kitchen, brewing up things or planting herbs in a garden that she's going to use in a spell later. Like that I can see how it would lend itself to cozier vibes. And some of in my research, and book has been recommended to me, I have not read it yet, but it's Brahms Slewfoot, is apparently very, very cozy, but also horror when looking at it, because it's basically, I think the one I was looking at, the one review pitched it as The Witch, which is a terrifying movie, meets Hocus Pocus. And it's this idea of, a woman in Connecticut in 1666, and she's this outcast, and um she has no choice but to become the witch that people are accusing her of. That's kind of the gist of it. But I've heard a lot of people recommend that book to me, and particularly to read that book like in this time of year, just because it's so good at setting the tone. But I listening to you talk about the zombies, Matt, part of me was like, no, 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 zombies can't be cozy horror, because when you look at the hallmarks of a zombie film, it's violence, it's gore, and you cannot get, like, the stakes are always going to be life or death. Like it's to me is one of the more anxiety inducing monsters that you can have, because I don't know, it feels constant. It's like constant attacks, right? Um as the hordes come down. But then you look at something like Shaun of the Dead, and I know it was meant to be a horror comedy. And so that changes things a little bit. But I think by changing the stakes of the film, because the whole point of the movie is trying to get to the pub, right? Which, I mean, number one, an English pub has to be on the list of like the more cozier places in the world. But then to make that, I mean, yes, it's stay alive, that's the stakes, but that's also when you put it that way, when you're like, well, the stakes are kind of low for a zombie film because really they're just trying to get to the pub. Um, and I think that m- meshed with the humor of the film and the fact that it is essentially like a best friend buddy comedy, which again is that focus on relationships. I don't know. I think I'm going to allow it. I think I'm going to say that that is definitely cozy horror.
Well, thanks for allowing it, but
I mean, I am the controller of all things genre.
exactly. Well, no, I was actually going to add, and this was part of my thought process as well, was the relationship aspect. There's not just the buddy comedy aspect, but a central theme of the movie is Sean not being very grown up, not being a good boyfriend. He gets dumped by Liz and he's trying to win her back by actually growing up and being responsible and showing that, he, their relationship is worth saving. And so, I mean, I think that's another relationship aspect too, that, I mean, he does make a marked change throughout the film. I mean, I don't want to do a huge deep dive on just Shaun of the Dead here, but I mean, from the beginning of the film to the end, he has evolved quite significantly, and in doing so shown to Liz like, oh, actually, you know um they do have something, and he is the boyfriend that she wants. And I will also add, the movie ends because one of the things that she says in dumping him is that she doesn't want to be one of those people that's, um, you know, in a relationship and always going to the same pub every night. And what do they end up doing? They're in a relationship going to the same pub every night because it's cozy, because it's comfortable, because in a mature relationship, it's okay to be comfortable with each other and not have high stakes all the time and constantly romantic gestures and all that sort of thing. So that, I'd say the relationship with Liz also kind of helps throw that in the cozy genre. Well, I guess after that prolonged deep dive into Shaun of the Dead, we might actually be kind of at a place for us to wrap up this episode. Now, obviously, we will be having some further episodes where we do some deeper dives into some other elements, or not elements, but other works that we feel fit into the cozy horror genre. But I think we did a pretty darn good job of coming up with a working definition, at least, of what we think the genre to be is. So if you listeners have any thoughts, or want to add into the conversation, we are at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page, and our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.